The ambient noise in the venue registered at approximately 85 decibels. It was fundamentally inefficient. Truett's holiday gathering was designed for corporate networking, but the high volume forced attendees to shout, thereby reducing the clarity of communication and increasing the probability of misinterpretation. I stood near the perimeter of the room, holding a glass of club soda with exactly 2 ice cubes. The condensation rate indicated the room temperature was climbing past 72 degrees. I tracked the floor. Most attendees exhibited standard social patterns. Relaxed shoulders, open stances, predictable laughter at prescribed intervals. I did not participate. My presence was a calculated obligation to Truett. He was my team lead for this quarter, his event, his optics. My attendance secured operational leverage for future project assignments. Then I saw her, Eleanor Watson, 34, CEO of Watson Logistics. She wore a dark blue off-the-shoulder dress. Sparkling drop earrings caught the low string lights hung haphazardly from the ceiling. Visually, she fit the environment. Behaviorally, she was a stark anomaly. Her jaw was clamped tight, the masseter muscle visibly flexed. Her grip on her small silver clutch was white-knuckled, indicating high physical tension. Her respiration was shallow, approximately 22 breaths per minute, signaling an elevated cortisol response. She was scanning the room not for contacts, but for an exit, or an asset. She walked directly toward me. I adjusted my gray shirt, maintaining my position against the exposed brick wall. I did not alter my facial expression. She stopped 6 inches away. The scent of impending rain and cold evening air clung to her wool coat. Contrasting sharply with the stale indoor heating, she leaned in, her voice dropping below the ambient noise threshold, forcing me to focus entirely on her auditory output. We need a quiet place with cameras. Your car front seat, dome light on, doors unlocked, a statistical deviation. We had met exactly twice in professional capacities. Once during a quarterly freight analysis, and once during a brief merger consultation she ultimately declined. Neither interaction indicated this trajectory. I looked at her face. Her eyes were wide, pupils dilated from acute stress. The silver clutch in her hand was unclasped just enough for me to see the edge of a folded red-bordered document. A default notice. My car is parked in the south lot, I said. Walk out the side door. I will follow in 60 seconds to avoid linked observation by third parties. Her shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. She turned and walked away without another word. A logical confirmation of my hypothesis. The interior of my sedan was climate-controlled to a constant 68 degrees. Acoustic insulation blocked 90% of the street noise, providing an optimal environment for data processing. I unlocked the doors remotely as I approached. She was already standing by the front passenger side, shivering slightly in the December wind. I opened the door for her, ensuring she was seated securely in the front, then got into the driver's seat. I left the doors unlocked and turned on the bright dome light, illuminating the pristine leather interior for the lot cameras. Show me the document, I said. She opened the clutch. Her fingers lacked their usual dexterity, fumbling with the clasp. She handed me the folded paper. This isn't flirting, I'm being leveraged, she said, her voice tight but remarkably steady. I have a default notice. I unfolded the paper. It was a standard hostile leverage notification. Desmond Bennett, she continued, stating the name of a known corporate raider. He bought up our mezzanine debt through a shell company. He's calling it in. This is business only. Arthur, no personal terms. I just need a fixer. I will pay your firm's standard retainer. I have a cashier's check for the first installment in this bag. I scanned the figures on the notice, committing the primary data points to memory. The debt-to-equity ratio was severely misaligned. You have a 14-day cure period, I noted, cross-referencing the standard clauses in my mental database. But the principal is $8 million. Your quarterly cash flow, based on my last assessment of your public filings, cannot cover this without liquidating core assets. He knows that, Eleanor said. She leaned against the cold leather seat, staring at the back of my headrest. He doesn't want the cash. He wants the company. There's a secret covenant in the original loan structure. If we default on a single scheduled payment, he gains emergency voting control of the board. He engineered this. I need your analytical processing. I need you. A paid, time-limited request requiring my specific professional skill. I calculated the probability of success. It was low, currently hovering around 18%. But the intrinsic asset value of Watson Logistics was historically underleveraged before this engineered crisis. The retainer is accepted, I said. But my methods are absolute. I require total access to your financial servers, unrestricted read access, and controlled write access with dual authorization for every entry. Zero interference. While I process the data, you'll have it by midnight, she said. She looked at me, a genuine expression of relief crossing her features. Gratitude is premature. The math is not yet in our favor. I put the car in drive. I am taking you back to your office. We begin now. The drive took 12 minutes. My phone buzzed twice in the cup holder with automated market alerts. A digital metronome ticking down the hours we didn't have. The headquarters of Watson Logistics was a brutalist concrete structure near the industrial port. We took the freight elevator to the 4th floor. The data room smelled of ozone from the aging server racks and damp carpeting. It was a chaotic environment. Cardboard file boxes were stacked precariously in corners, disrupting the optimal airflow for the cooling units. This is inefficient, I stated, looking at the physical files. Paper records increase retrieval time by 400%. It's inherited chaos, Eleanor replied, walking to the main terminal. My grandfather built this company on handshakes and paper ledgers. I've been digitizing it for 3 years, but the migration is slow. Desmond timed this perfectly. He struck while we were vulnerable in the transition. Timing is a metric. It can be countered. I sat down at the secondary terminal. I pulled an encrypted flash drive from my inner suit pocket and inserted it into the port. I booted up my proprietary financial modeling software. The interface glowed a stark blue against the dim, flickering lighting of the server room. Provide the server bridge protocol. She handed me a slip of paper with a 12-digit alphanumeric string. For the next 6 hours, I processed the ledger. The numbers began to form a distinct narrative. Desmond Bennett had systematically targeted their weakest supply chain vendors. He had purchased their outstanding invoices, forced delays in shipping routes through proxy complaints, and artificially shrunk Watson Logistics' margins until they missed the critical end-of-month payment. It was a textbook starvation tactic, executed with brutal precision. Eleanor brought me black coffee at 2 a.m. I did not require it to maintain wakefulness, but I accepted the caloric intake. I placed it exactly 2 inches from the edge of my keyboard to prevent accidental spillage. "What do you see?" she asked. She was standing behind my chair, maintaining a distance of precisely 18 inches. "I see a structured assault," I replied, my eyes tracking the scrolling columns of data. "He has isolated your revenue streams. Your Eastern distribution hub is hemorrhaging capital due to delayed vendor shipments. The algorithm predicts a total liquidity failure in 9 days." She exhaled sharply. The sound was ragged in the quiet room. "Can we stop it? I am constructing a contingency model. However, I require physical verification of the assets at the Eastern hub. Digital numbers can be manipulated. Physical inventory cannot." At 6 a.m., we drove to the Eastern distribution hub. The facility was a massive, corrugated steel warehouse on the edge of the city limits. The morning air was sharp, biting through my suit jacket, but I ignored the thermal discomfort. We walked onto the concrete floor. The noise was immense, forklifts reversing, air brakes hissing, foremen shouting orders over the din. I pulled out my digital tablet and began pacing the loading docks. I timed the loading sequence of 3 separate long-haul trucks. "Your throughput is degraded," I stated, not looking up from the screen. "Pallet loading is taking an average of 14.2 minutes. The industry standard is 11. The inefficiency is costing you roughly $3,000 a day in idle fuel and labor." Eleanor walked beside me, dodging a forklift with practiced ease. "The automated sorting system broke down 2 weeks ago. We're doing manual routing. Desmond's people at the bank blocked the emergency credit line to fix it." I stopped walking. I looked at the floor manager, a man in his 50s with a clipboard, directing the manual labor with rapid, precise hand signals. I tracked his movements. He is compensating for the mechanical failure by routing the heaviest pallets to the most experienced loaders. It prevents a total bottleneck, but it exhausts your best personnel. "That's Marcus," Eleanor said. Her voice was fiercely defensive. "He's been here since I was a kid. He knows every route by heart. His institutional knowledge is currently preventing a 20% loss in client churn," I noted, inputting the variable into my tablet. but the physical strain is unsustainable. I will factor his operational ceiling into the restructuring model. We returned to the corporate office by mid-morning. I had the necessary physical parameters. On Tuesday morning, the harsh fluorescent lights of the data room kicked on automatically. My phone rang. The caller ID displayed an unknown number, but the area code matched the corporate financial district. I answered, "Arthur Ross." "Arthur." The voice was smooth, engineered for persuasion. "Desmond Bennett. I hear you're looking at the Watson books. I advise you to walk away. The structural decay is terminal. Don't attach your firm's spotless name to a sinking ship." I pulled up the amortization schedule on my secondary monitor. My heart rate remained steady at 65 beats per minute. "Your assessment of their structural decay is mathematically flawed, Desmond. The core logistics routes hold a valuation of 12.4 million. You are attempting to acquire it for the debt value of 8. It's business. Be smart. Step back, and I'll route my next 3 acquisitions through your desk. Highly lucrative work for a man of your analytical caliber. A bribe framed as an opportunity? I am currently retained by Watson Logistics," I said. My voice remained flat, devoid of fluctuation. "Any communication regarding their debt must go through me. If you attempt to contact Eleanor Watson directly or harass her vendors further, I will file an injunction based on predatory interference. I have documented your manual blocking of their equipment repair credit lines. This is a hard boundary. Do you understand the terms?" A pause on the line. The silence lasted exactly 3.4 seconds. "You're making a mistake, robot." The line clicked dead. I documented the call timestamp and summarized the threat in my encrypted log. Eleanor was standing in the doorway. She held a stack of physical manifests. She had heard my side of the exchange. "He offered you a deal," she said, stepping into the room. "And you refused it. It was mathematically inferior to my current trajectory," I said, "and it violated ethical compliance parameters." She walked to the table and dropped the manifests. The sound was heavy. "Is that the only reason?" "Data is the only reason for any action." I turned back to my screen, bringing up the regional asset maps. "We have an obstacle. The Eastern Distribution Hub is operating at a 4% loss due to the mechanical failures. We need to liquidate it immediately to generate the required 2 million in capital to stall the default covenant." Eleanor stiffened. Her posture became completely rigid. "No," I looked up. "The numbers do not support retention. The sale of the real estate alone covers the immediate capital deficit. That hub was my grandfather's first warehouse," she said. Her tone was elevated, breaching the parameters of a calm corporate discussion. "Half the staff there have been with us for 20 years. Marcus has a daughter in college. I am not firing them to satisfy a spreadsheet. Your emotional attachment is inefficient," I stated bluntly. "If we do not generate 2 million in capital by Friday, Desmond takes the entire company. 100% of the staff will be terminated. Liquidating the Eastern Hub saves 80% of the workforce. It is basic triage." She crossed her arms. The silver bracelets on her wrist clinked together sharply. "Find another way, Arthur. There is no other mathematical path. Then look outside the math." She turned and left the room. Her footsteps echoed loudly down the concrete hallway until they faded completely. My cursor hovered over the sell order execution macro. My finger didn't click. The spreadsheet waited, the cursor blinking at a steady rhythm of 1 hertz, but my hand remained entirely still. The data was perfect, yet executing the command felt fundamentally flawed. The friction in my chest was unfamiliar. It was a processing error caused by her distress. I closed the macro window. I spent the next 12 hours rerunning the models. I analyzed offshore bridge loans, high-yield junk bonds, and asset-backed securities. Every standard model pointed back to liquidating the Eastern Hub. By Wednesday evening, the atmosphere in the office was suffocating. The sky outside the 4th-floor windows was dark and threatening heavy rain. I sat at the main conference table, surrounded by hard copies of vendor contracts. Eleanor sat at the opposite end, manually reviewing shipping manifests because the digital system was lagging due to Desmond's continued interference with their network providers. The silence was heavy, broken only by the sound of paper turning and the distant rumble of thunder. She rubbed her left temple, a microtel indicating a stress-induced headache. I noted the frequency. 3 times in the last hour, the overhead lighting in the room was overly bright, emitting a high-frequency hum that grated on the auditory nerves. I stood up. I walked to the wall panel and dimmed the lights by 40%. I adjusted the thermostat, raising the temperature by 2 degrees to counteract the draft bleeding through the old window seals. I did not announce my actions. I returned to my seat and resumed reading. She looked up, noticing the shift in the environment. She did not say anything, but the frequency of her temple rubbing ceased. She let out a small breath and went back to the manifests. I looked at my phone. A secure message from Truitt. He was acting as my legal liaison back at the firm, monitoring the wire traffic. Bennett is moving early. He found a loophole in the covenant. Check the operating accounts. I opened the banking portal on my laptop. I typed in the access credentials rapidly. The screen refreshed. A block of red text appeared across the dashboard, replacing the standard black font. "Eleanor," I said. She looked up. Her eyes were rimmed with exhaustion. "What?" Desmond triggered an emergency freeze clause. "All operating accounts are locked." She stood up. The heavy wooden chair scraped loudly against the floor. "He can't do that. We have 8 days left on the cure period." "He cited a material adverse change in your vendor contracts," I said, analyzing the bank's automated legal notice. The legal jargon was designed to obfuscate, but the mechanism was clear. It is a gray area, but it provides his shell company enough legal cover to freeze the capital temporarily pending a review. Payroll cannot be processed on Friday. Operations will cease within 48 hours. She walked to the window, her back to me. The reflection in the glass showed her shoulders trembling. The rain had started, hitting the glass in erratic, violent patterns. "I failed," she whispered. Her voice was thin, stripped of its usual command. "I promised my grandfather I would hold the line. I told him the transition to digital would make us stronger, faster. And now I can't even pay Marcus. I failed." A vulnerability moment. My standard protocol for client distress was to provide a statistical probability of recovery based on historical precedent. I opened my mouth to recite the figures. A 30% chance of lifting the freeze via emergency injunction within 72 hours. I looked at her reflection in the dark glass. The data felt entirely inadequate. The parameters of standard protocol were insufficient for this interaction. I stood up. I walked over to the table and picked up my phone. I placed it face down on the wood. A deliberate cessation of data intake. I gave her my full attention. I walked to the window, stopping exactly 2 feet away. I kept my hands in my pockets. I did not touch her. Physical contact in this state could be interpreted as pity or an assertion of control, neither of which was optimal. "You have not failed," I said. My voice was steady, calibrated to project absolute certainty. She let out a harsh breath, shaking her head. She didn't turn around. "I don't know how to fight someone who changes the rules mid-game. I am a logistics manager, Arthur. I move freight from point A to point B. I don't build financial traps." "You don't fight him," I said. "I do." I turned away from the window. I needed a solution that preserved the Eastern hub. It was an inefficient parameter, but it was her parameter, which made it a primary constraint. I walked out of the conference room and took the elevator down to the lobby. The rain was steady now, flooding the gutters. I walked down the block to the corner coffee shop. I ordered a vanilla latte with extra sugar. It was an incredibly inefficient beverage, devoid of nutritional value. But my data indicated she consumed it when her stress metrics peaked. I also purchased a plain turkey sandwich. I returned to the conference room and placed the cup and the wrapped sandwich on the table next to her manifests. She turned from the window. She looked at the cup, then at the food, then at me. "You drink black coffee, and you never eat while working. It is for you. Your caloric intake has dropped below operational standards for the past 24 hours. Your cognitive function will degrade." She looked at the sugar packets I had set beside the cup. A tiny, dry laugh escaped her. "You bought sugar on purpose? That's how I know this is a legitimate crisis." She picked up the cup. Her hands were still slightly unsteady, but she took a long sip. Her shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. "Thank you. Drink it, eat the sandwich. We have 36 hours to restructure." We worked through the night. The proximity was a necessity. The data room became a closed ecosystem, isolated from the storm outside. At 3 a.m., the exhaustion was a tangible physical weight in the room. I was reviewing the master vendor agreements, looking for a structural flaw in Desmond's acquisition strategy. I was reading a contract Desmond had absorbed from a third-party supplier, specifically a packaging vendor based out of Ohio. My eyes scanned the dense legal text. Paragraph 4, subsection C. I read it twice, then a third time, to ensure my cognitive functions were not impaired by fatigue. I cross-referenced the language with standard UCC filings. I have it, I said. Eleanor dropped her pen. She leaned over my shoulder to look at the monitor. I could smell the vanilla coffee and the faint, clean scent of rain. I did not move away. I kept my posture rigid, my hands resting lightly on the keyboard. Look at this clause. I pointed to the screen with my pen, tracing the dense block of text. Desmond's shell company assumed this contract when he bought the debt, but the assignment clause explicitly requires written consent from Watson Logistics for any transfer of debt involving third-party liens. He bypassed the consent protocol to execute the hostile buyout quickly. She squinted at the text, reading the highlighted lines. He forged the consent? No. He ignored it. He assumed you wouldn't have the legal capital or the time to audit a Tier 3 vendor contract. He assumed you would panic at the freeze order and surrender the board seats before Friday. The debt acquisition is procedurally invalid. Does this unfreeze the accounts? Not immediately, but it provides the leverage required to destroy his position entirely. I looked at her. Her eyes were bright, the exhaustion temporarily overridden by adrenaline. I need you to locate the original, physically signed master agreement from 3 years ago. Digital copies will be contested in arbitration. We need the wet ink. It's in the archives. I'll find it. She stood up, her energy renewed by a practical task. She walked into the adjacent storage room. At 8 a.m., Truitt arrived with a box of pastries and 2 large coffees. He had been running interference with our firm's compliance officers all morning. He looked at the whiteboard, which was now covered in my restructuring timeline, legal citations, and a complex flowchart detailing Vanguard Holdings' shell structure. You look like you haven't slept, Arthur. Sleep is a biological necessity that can be deferred for optimal performance during crisis management, I said, organizing the printed documents into exact, squared stacks. Right. Truitt looked at Eleanor, who was emerging from the archive room holding a dusty blue binder, a smudge of soot on her gray blazer. You two are intense. Thursday was consumed by preparation. I built the counter squeeze. I drafted the legal notices, checking the regulatory codes 3 times. I initiated a secure transfer protocol with my firm's managing partners. By Friday morning, the board meeting was set. Desmond Bennett had called it to formally execute the voting control transfer due to the missed payment and frozen accounts. The boardroom was located in Desmond's downtown office. Glass walls, heavy leather chairs, a sweeping view of the city skyline, an environment deliberately designed to intimidate and project dominance. Eleanor and I walked in together. I wore a tailored dark suit. My briefcase contained the precise documentation required, sorted by chronological relevance. Eleanor wore a sharp, structured gray blazer. She looked composed, though I noted a slight tension in her grip on the blue binder she carried. Desmond sat at the head of the long mahogany table. 2 corporate lawyers sat beside him, their laptops open and running. Eleanor? Desmond smiled. It lacked warmth. It was a facial arrangement designed for dominance. Arthur, let's make this painless. The accounts are frozen. The cure period is functionally over. Sign the transfer and I'll keep you on as a consultant for 6 months. I placed my briefcase on the table. The click of the latches was loud in the quiet room. I extracted 3 identical folders and slid them across the polished wood. The transfer is invalid, Desmond. Desmond didn't open the folder. He leaned back in his chair, adjusting his cuffs. I have the banking orders right here, Arthur. I have the leverage. You have nothing but a dying company. I did not raise my voice. I relied purely on the data. I looked directly at his lead counsel. You purchased the mezzanine debt through Vanguard Holdings. However, Vanguard Holdings failed to secure written consent for the transfer of the Tier 3 liens, specifically violating Section 4, subsection C of the Master Vendor Agreement. This renders the debt acquisition procedurally null and void. His lawyers immediately opened the folders. They began scanning the text, their eyes tracking the highlighted sections. Desmond's smile fractured. He looked at his lawyers, then back at me. His posture shifted from relaxed to aggressive. A technicality. I'll tie you up in court for 3 years. She'll bleed out in 3 weeks without payroll. She'll be begging to sell by Tuesday. Incorrect, I stated. I am the most prepared person in this room. I pulled out a second document, placing it perfectly parallel to the first. Because your debt acquisition is currently invalid, the freeze order you initiated on Watson Logistics operating accounts constitutes fraudulent interference and predatory lending practices. My firm has already filed the counterclaim with the regulatory board. Furthermore, I have secured a short-term bridge facility from my firm's capital reserves. Our partners approved the terms at 6 this morning, collateralized against the Eastern Distribution Hub's appraised real estate value. The funds are pre-cleared for release at noon, which clears the original $8 million principal in full. Desmond leaned forward, his composure breaking completely. Your firm backed her? You put your own neck on the line for a logistics company? The company is fundamentally sound. Your interference was the only toxic variable. Eleanor stood up. She did not look at me for permission or support. She reached into her bag and pulled out the dusty blue binder. She opened it, removed the original physical document, and placed it squarely in front of Desmond. Here is the original contract, Desmond, Eleanor said. Her voice was steady, ringing with absolute, unshakable authority. No signature of consent. You broke the law to steal my company. The bridge loan clears the debt. You are entirely removed from our ledger. We are done. The room went completely silent. Desmond looked at his lawyers. The lead counsel read the wet ink signature page, then gave Desmond a slight, grim nod. The trap had closed. The leverage was gone. The numbers did not lie. This isn't over, Desmond muttered, standing up abruptly. He didn't look at Eleanor. He glared at me. Statistically, it is, I said, calmly closing my briefcase and locking the latches. The transaction is complete. I expect the freeze order lifted by noon, or the fraud charges proceed to the federal level. Our outside counsel is already on standby to file the injunction. We left the building. The cold morning air hit us on the sidewalk as we exited the revolving doors. The crushing tension of the last 5 days began to dissipate. Eleanor stopped walking. She looked at me. The tension in her jaw was completely gone. You secured the bridge loan against the Eastern Hub, she said. Her brow furrowed slightly. You didn't liquidate it. Correct. It remains an operational asset under your control. Arthur. She stepped closer, invading my standard perimeter of personal space. I did not step back. You risked your firm's capital. You told me the numbers didn't support saving the hub. You said my emotional attachment was inefficient. I recalibrated the parameters, I said smoothly, looking down at her. The human capital retained by keeping the hub operational generates long-term loyalty, which reduces turnover costs and maintains supply chain efficiency. When factored over a 5-year projection and incorporating Marcus's specific routing knowledge, it is mathematically viable. She smiled. A genuine, relaxed smile that reached her eyes. It was a highly inefficient use of facial muscles, but I found the visual output exceptionally pleasing. My pulse rate elevated to 72 beats per minute. Thank you, she said. The aftermath took 3 days to finalize. The accounts were unfrozen by 11:45 a.m. that Friday. Payroll was met on schedule. Marcus and his crew retained their positions. The hostile takeover was officially dead. I filed the final compliance reports on Monday morning. On Tuesday evening, I sat at my desk in my apartment. The environment was minimalist, clean, silent. Everything was in its designated place. I was reviewing the final closure documents for the Watson file. Everything was aligned. The logic was sound. The firm had made a highly profitable margin on the bridge loan. Yet, the silence in the apartment felt different. It felt empty. The absence of the chaotic energy of her data room, the absence of the smell of vanilla coffee, the absence of the quiet, the determined sound of her turning pages. It all registered as a negative value in my current environment. A void. My phone buzzed on the desk. A text from Eleanor. I have the final signed copies of the bridge loan. Can I bring them over? Yes, I replied. 20 minutes later, a sharp knock sounded at my door. I opened it. She was holding a manila envelope. She wore a simple black coat and jeans, a stark contrast to her corporate armor. She stepped inside, bringing the scent of the cold city air with her. The final terms? She said, handing me the envelope. I took it. I did not open it to verify the signatures. I placed it on the console table by the door. Is there a secondary purpose for your visit? I asked. She looked at me. Her eyes held a question. She did not retreat from my bluntness. I wanted to see you outside of a crisis. I am the same person outside of a crisis. I process data. I fix structures. You do more than that, she said quietly. She walked further into the living room, observing the stark, clean lines of my furniture. You made me feel safe when everything was collapsing. You listened when I needed you to. And you fought for the things I cared about, even when they didn't make mathematical sense to you initially. You didn't just save my company. You saved my grandfather's legacy. It was the correct course of action. She stepped closer. The proximity was deliberate. Tomorrow at 9 in the morning, I am addressing the entire company on the warehouse floor to announce the restructuring, she said. Marcus and the team will be there. I want you standing next to me. Not as my consultant, as my partner. I looked at her. I processed the data. My apartment was quiet. My schedule was optimized. My life was a perfect column of numbers, perfectly balanced, perfectly isolated. But looking at her standing in my living room, offering a public alignment that defied simple corporate bounds, I realized that a perfect column of numbers was meaningless without a human variable to give it value. The void was not a lack of data. It was a lack of connection. I had spent my life eliminating variables, but I wanted to keep this one. I walked over to my kitchen counter. I picked up my digital calendar tablet. I turned the screen on. I looked at my meticulously planned week, segmented into 15-minute blocks of pure efficiency. I am currently making a practical decision, I said. I deleted a 3-hour block of optimization algorithms scheduled for tomorrow morning. I deleted my afternoon portfolio review. In their place, I typed a single word across the entire day. Eleanor. I set the tablet down. I turned back to her, ensuring she saw the screen. I have allocated time for us, I said. I will be there at 9. She looked at the tablet, then back at me. Her smile returned. Softer this time. More intimate. She reached out and rested her hand gently on my forearm. The physical contact was brief, comforting, and grounded in absolute reality. The warmth of her hand registered clearly against the cool fabric of my shirt. I am very amenable to that, Arthur, she said. The data was conclusive. The void was gone. The end. Closing thoughts. I learned that true victory is waking up with a clear conscience. Winning the wrong way is actually losing. Real love isn't about drama. It's about consistency, safety, and showing up when the numbers don't add up. Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.